Jake Thompson pushed his black motorcycle harder down the empty highway. The engine roared beneath him as the speedometer climbed past 70 miles per hour. Wind rushed past his leather jacket and through his dark hair. He had been riding for almost 4 hours straight without stopping. His body was getting tired and his gas tank was running dangerously low. The afternoon sun blazed overhead in a perfect blue sky. Not a single cloud could be seen anywhere. The weather was exactly what every motorcycle rider dreamed of. Jake had woken up that morning in a terrible mood. Work had been stressful all week. His boss had yelled at him 3 times about missing deadlines. His girlfriend Sarah had been arguing with him about money problems. Everything in his life seemed to be going wrong lately. But now on the open road, Jake felt some of that anger starting to fade away. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of him, like a black ribbon cutting through green fields. Tall trees lined both sides of the road, creating shadows that danced across the asphalt. Farmhouses dotted the landscape in the distance with their red barns and white fences. This was exactly why Jake loved riding his motorcycle. Out here, he could forget about all of his problems for a while. The fuel gauge on his dashboard showed the needle pointing dangerously close to empty. Jake knew he needed to find a gas station soon, or he would be stranded on the side of the road. He had been so eager to get away from the city that he forgot to fill up before leaving. Now he was paying the price for that mistake. He squinted ahead, looking for any sign of civilization. After riding another 10 minutes, Jake finally saw what he was looking for. A small gas station appeared on the right side of the road about half a mile ahead. The building looked old and weathered, but the sign clearly said it was open. Jake felt relieved as he slowed down and prepared to turn into the parking lot. The gas station was called Miller's Stop, and it had probably been there for at least 30 years. The paint on the building was faded and peeling in several places. 2 old-fashioned gas pumps stood side by side near the front entrance. A small convenience store was attached to the main building with large windows that were covered in advertisements for soda and snacks. Jake pulled his motorcycle up to the first gas pump and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt strange after hours of engine noise and rushing wind. He could hear birds singing in the trees nearby, and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Only 2 other vehicles were at the station. An old blue pickup truck was parked near the store entrance, and a white sit-in sat at the other gas pump. He climbed off his motorcycle and stretched his sore muscles. His legs felt stiff from sitting in the same position for so long. His back ached and his shoulders were tight with tension. Jake rolled his neck from side to side, trying to work out the kinks. The warm afternoon air felt good on his skin after being bundled up in his leather jacket. The gas station seemed peaceful and quiet. Through the store windows, Jake could see the owner sitting behind the counter reading a newspaper. An older woman was browsing the snack aisles, taking her time to decide what to buy. Everything about this place felt slow and relaxed compared to the busy city life Jake was used to. For a moment, he almost forgot about all the stress and anger that had been building up inside him all week. Jake walked around to the side of his motorcycle where the gas tank was located. He unscrewed the cap and reached for the gas pump handle. All he wanted was to fill up his tank quickly and get back on the road. He had no idea that the next few minutes would change his life forever. Jake was about to insert the gas pump nozzle into his tank when something caught his attention from the corner of his eye. A small brown dog had wandered onto the gas station property from somewhere behind the building. The dog looked like a mixed breed with floppy ears and a wagging tail that moved back and forth like a happy flag. The little animal appeared to be completely friendly and harmless. It had bright brown eyes that sparkled with curiosity and intelligence. Around its neck was a bright red collar with a small silver bell that made gentle tinkling sounds as the dog moved around exploring the area. The collar looked new and well-maintained, which meant this dog clearly belonged to someone who cared about it. Jake watched as the dog sniffed around the base of the gas pumps with obvious interest. Everything seemed new and exciting to this small creature. It investigated a patch of grass near the parking lot, then moved on to examine a small puddle of water that had formed near the building. The dog's tail never stopped wagging as it explored its surroundings with innocent joy. The dog weighed maybe 15 pounds at most and stood about 12 inches tall. Its brown fur was clean and well-groomed, showing that its owner took good care of it. This was clearly someone's beloved pet that had somehow gotten loose and wandered away from home. The dog showed no signs of fear or aggression toward the strangers at the gas station. After a few minutes of exploring, the dog noticed Jake standing by his motorcycle. With typical dog friendliness, it trotted over to investigate this new person. The little bell on its collar jingled softly with each step. The dog approached Jake with its tail wagging, even faster now, clearly hoping for some attention, or maybe a friendly pat on the head. Jake looked down at the approaching dog and felt his mood darken immediately. He was already stressed and angry about his problems at work and home. The last thing he wanted to deal with right now was some random dog bothering him while he was trying to hit gas and get back on the road. He just wanted to fill his tank and leave this place as quickly as possible. The dog reached Jake and began sniffing around his heavy motorcycle boots with obvious curiosity. To the dog, this was just another interesting smell to investigate. It had no way of knowing that Jake was having a terrible day and was not in the mood for friendly interactions with anyone or anything. The dog was simply being a dog, doing what dogs naturally do when they meet new people. Jake felt his irritation growing stronger as the dog continued to sniff around his feet. Every little thing seemed to annoy him today. The traffic on his way out of the city had been terrible. His motorcycle had made strange noises that worried him. His girlfriend had sent him 3 angry text messages before he left. Now this dog was adding to his frustration by delaying his departure from the gas station. The small animal looked up at Jake with trusting brown eyes, as if expecting some kind of friendly response. Its tail continued wagging hopefully. The dog had probably been treated kindly by most people it met throughout its life. It had no reason to expect anything different from this leather-jacketed stranger standing next to the big black motorcycle. But Jake was building up anger inside him like pressure in a steam kettle. All his recent frustrations and disappointments were mixing together into a dangerous emotional storm. The innocent dog had no idea that it had approached someone who was about to make a terrible decision that would change everything for both of them in the next few seconds. Without any warning or provocation, Jake suddenly drew back his right leg and kicked the small dog hard with his heavy motorcycle boot. The kick connected with the innocent animal's side, sending it tumbling backward across the concrete pavement with a sharp yelp of pain and surprise. The little silver bell on its collar rang frantically as the dog struggled to regain its balance. The force of Jake's kick was completely unnecessary and cruel. His steel-toed boot was designed for protection while riding his motorcycle, and it was much too heavy for such a small, defenseless creature. The dog weighed only 15 pounds, while Jake weighed over 200 pounds. There was no contest between them, and the dog never had a chance to defend itself or escape. The poor animal hit the ground hard and lay there for several seconds, whimpering in confusion and fear. Its bright brown eyes that had been so trusting and friendly just moments before were now filled with terror and pain. The dog tried to get back on its feet, but stumbled and fell again, clearly hurt by the unprovoked attack. Jake felt a surge of satisfaction immediately after the kick, as if he had finally released some of the anger and frustration that had been building up inside him all day. For just a moment he felt better about his problems at work and his arguments with his girlfriend. Hurting something smaller and weaker than himself made him feel powerful and in control again. But that feeling of satisfaction lasted only a few seconds before it was replaced by something much worse. Jake looked down at the injured dog and suddenly realized what he had actually done. He had attacked an innocent animal that had done nothing wrong except approach him in a friendly way. The dog had been curious and gentle, and he had repaid that friendliness with violence. The dog managed to get back on its feet, but it was clearly limping on its left front leg. It looked up at Jake with confused and frightened eyes, as if trying to understand why this stranger had hurt it so badly. The animal's tail was no longer wagging. Instead, it was tucked between its legs in fear and submission. The little bell on its collar made sad tinkling sounds as the dog trembled. Jake tried to tell himself that the kick wasn't that hard, and the dog would be fine in a few minutes. He attempted to justify his actions by thinking about how stressed he was and how the dog had been bothering him while he was trying to hit gas. But deep down he knew there was no excuse for what he had just done. He had hurt an innocent creature for no good reason. The dog took a few careful steps away from Jake, obviously afraid that he might hurt it again. Its limp was getting worse, and Jake could see that the animal was in real pain. What had started as a moment of anger and frustration had turned into something much more serious. The dog needed help, but it was too scared to approach any humans now. Other people at the gas station were starting to notice that something had happened. The elderly woman inside the convenience store looked out through the window with concern on her face. The owner behind the counter put down his newspaper and stood up to get a better view of what was going on outside. Jake realized that his cruel act had not gone completely unnoticed. The injured dog limped toward the back of the gas station property, looking for somewhere safe to hide and recover from its injuries. Its little bell continued to jingle sadly with each painful step. Jake watched it go and felt a growing sense of dread in his stomach. He knew he had crossed a line that should never be crossed. He had become the kind of person he never wanted to be. But Jake had no idea that his troubles were just beginning. He didn't know that someone very important had witnessed his cruel act. Someone who cared deeply about that small brown dog was about to make Jake face the consequences of his terrible decision in ways he never could have imagined. Jake was trying to focus on filling his gas tank and pretending that nothing had happened when he heard a voice behind him that made his blood freeze in his veins. The voice was calm and steady, but it carried a coldness that cut through the warm afternoon air like a knife through butter. Every word was spoken clearly and deliberately with a tone that promised serious consequences. "That was a big mistake, friend," the voice said slowly and quietly. Each word seemed to hang in the air for a long moment before the next one followed. There was no shouting or yelling, but somehow that made the voice even more frightening. Jake could hear controlled anger underneath the calm surface, like lava flowing beneath a thin layer of rock. Jake's hand froze on the gas pump handle as fear shot through his entire body. His heart began beating so fast that he could hear it pounding in his ears. Sweat broke out on his forehead, despite the fact that he had been feeling perfectly comfortable in the warm weather just seconds before. His mouth went dry, and his hand started to shake slightly. The voice belonged to someone who had clearly witnessed Jake's cruel attack on the innocent dog. Jake realized with growing horror that his moment of violence had not gone unnoticed as he had hoped. Someone had been watching, and that someone did not sound happy about what they had seen. Jake knew he was about to face consequences for his actions. Jake wanted to turn around and see who was speaking to him, but he found himself unable to move for several long seconds. Fear had paralyzed him completely. The voice had sounded like it belonged to a man who was older and more experienced than Jake. It was the voice of someone who had seen many things in life and knew how to handle difficult situations. Finally, Jake forced himself to turn around slowly, like someone in a nightmare who knows they are about to see something terrible. His movements felt stiff and unnatural as adrenaline flooded his system, preparing his body for fight or flight. But Jake already knew that running away was not going to be an option in this situation. Standing about 10 feet away from Jake was a man who looked to be in his middle 50s. He was tall and solidly built with broad shoulders that spoke of years of physical work. His gray hair was cut short and neat, and his face was weathered by sun and wind like someone who spent most of his time outdoors. He wore simple clothes that were clean but well used. But it was the man's eyes that truly frightened Jake. They were steel gray and completely focused on Jake's face with an intensity that was almost physical. Those eyes had seen many things in life, and they showed no fear or uncertainty. They were the eyes of someone who knew exactly what he was doing and was prepared to follow through on whatever action he decided to take. The man stood with his feet planted firmly on the ground and his arms hanging relaxed at his sides. He was not making any threatening gestures, but his entire presence radiated a quiet, dangerous energy that made Jake want to back away. This was clearly someone who was used to being in control of difficult situations and knew how to handle trouble when it arose. Jake tried to speak but found that his voice had completely disappeared. His throat felt tight and constricted, as if someone was squeezing it with invisible hands. All he could do was stare back at those cold gray eyes and wait to see what would happen next. He had never felt so small and helpless in his entire life. The man continued to study Jake's face for several more seconds as if he was reading a book and learning everything he needed to know about Jake's character and personality. The silence stretched out between them like a taut wire ready to snap at any moment. Jake knew that his life was about to change in ways he could not even begin to imagine. The gray-haired man walked slowly toward the injured dog that was still limping near the back corner of the gas station. His movements were careful and deliberate, as if he was approaching something very precious and fragile. Jake watched in growing horror as he began to understand the true situation he had gotten himself into. This was not just a random witness to his cruel act. "Come here, buddy," the man said softly as he knelt down on the concrete pavement. His voice had completely changed from the cold, threatening tone he had used with Jake. Now it was gentle and full of love and concern. The injured dog looked up at the sound of his voice, and its tail gave a weak wag of recognition, despite its pain and fear. Jake felt his stomach drop as the terrible truth became clear. The dog he had kicked was not some random stray animal that had wandered onto the gas station property. This was someone's beloved pet, and that someone had just witnessed Jake attack his best friend for absolutely no reason. The situation had gone from bad to much worse in the span of a few seconds. The man carefully picked up the small brown dog and held it gently against his chest while examining its injuries. Buddy whimpered softly but seemed to relax in his owner's arms, knowing that he was finally safe. The man's weathered hands moved over the dog's body, checking for broken bones or serious damage while speaking in soothing tones. "It's okay, boy," the man whispered as he continued his examination. "You're going to be fine. That bad man isn't going to hurt you anymore." His voice was filled with genuine love and concern for the small animal. It was clear that this dog meant everything to him, and seeing it hurt had awakened something dangerous in his protective instincts. Jake learned later that the man's name was Tom Rodriguez, and he was a retired military veteran who had served 3 tours of duty overseas. Tom lived alone in a small house about 5 miles from the gas station, and Buddy had been his constant companion for the past 6 years. The dog was literally all the family Tom had left in the world. Tom had stopped at the gas station to buy coffee and used the restroom during his weekly trip into town for groceries and supplies. He had left Buddy in his old blue pickup truck, with the windows cracked open for fresh air. Somehow the clever dog had managed to squeeze through the narrow opening and escape to explore the interesting smells around the gas station. Tom had come out of the convenience store just in time to see Jake's vicious kick send his beloved companion tumbling across the concrete. In that moment, Tom had felt a rage unlike anything he had experienced since his combat days. But his military training had taught him to stay calm and controlled even in the most intense situations. After checking Buddy thoroughly, Tom determined that the dog had some bruising and soreness, but no broken bones or internal injuries. The little animal would recover from its physical wounds within a few days. But Tom knew that the emotional trauma of being attacked by a stranger might take much longer to heal. Buddy had always been trusting and friendly with everyone he met. Tom stood up slowly while still holding Buddy securely in his arms. He turned to face Jake with those same cold gray eyes that had frightened the younger man so badly just minutes before. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Tom's attention focused completely on the person who had hurt his best friend. "This dog has never hurt anyone in his entire life," Tom said in a voice that was quiet but filled with barely controlled fury. "He's the friendliest animal you'll ever meet. He approaches everyone with love and trust because that's his nature. And you repaid that trust by kicking him like he was a piece of garbage." Jake tried to stammer out some kind of response, but Tom held up one hand to silence him. The older man was not finished speaking, and he was going to make sure Jake understood exactly what he had done and why it was so wrong. This was going to be a lesson that Jake would never forget for the rest of his life. Tom continued to hold Buddy protectively, while fixing Jake with a stare that could have melted steel. The older man's military training was evident in the way he carried himself with quiet confidence and complete control over his emotions. He was clearly furious about what had happened to his dog, but he was channeling that anger into something much more effective than shouting or threats. "You're going to look at my dog and apologize to him," Tom said in a voice that left no room for argument or negotiation. "Then you're going to explain to me why you thought it was acceptable to kick an innocent animal that was doing nothing but being friendly to you. And your explanation better be good, because I'm having a hard time thinking of any reason that would justify what you just did." Jake felt smaller and more ashamed with every word that came out of Tom's mouth. He had never been confronted so directly about his actions before, and he didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to make excuses and try to justify what he had done. Another part of him wanted to run away and pretend this whole situation had never happened. "I was just having a bad day," Jake finally managed to stammer out. His voice sounded weak and pathetic even to his own ears. "I got problems at work, and my girlfriend has been giving me grief about money. The dog was bothering me while I was trying to get gas. I didn't mean to hurt him that bad. It was just a reaction." Tom's expression didn't change at all as he listened to Jake's feeble excuses. If anything, his eyes got even colder and more disapproving. When Jake finished speaking, Tom shook his head slowly, as if he was dealing with a child who had said something particularly foolish and disappointing. "So let me understand this correctly," Tom said with deadly calm. "You were having problems with your job and your girlfriend, so you decided to take out your frustrations on a 15-pound dog that can't fight back. Does that about sum up your explanation for this situation we find ourselves in?" Other people at the gas station were beginning to notice the tense confrontation taking place near the gas pumps. The elderly woman who had been shopping inside came out to see what was happening. The gas station owner stepped outside his front door to get a better view. Two more customers who had just arrived stopped to watch the drama unfold. Jake became aware that he now had an audience for his humiliation, and that made everything even worse. These strangers were all going to see him get dressed down by an older man for kicking a defenseless dog. Word would probably spread around the small town about the cruel biker who attacked an innocent animal at Miller's Stop gas station. "There were a dozen different ways you could have handled the situation if my dog was really bothering you," Tom continued relentlessly. "You could have asked him to go away. You could have moved to a different pump. You could have gone inside and asked the owner to help. But instead you chose violence against something that weighs 1/10 of what you weigh." Jake tried to interrupt with more excuses, but Tom cut him off immediately. The older man was nowhere near finished with his lecture, and he was going to make sure Jake heard every word of it. This was about much more than just one incident with a dog. This was about the kind of person Jake was choosing to be. "I've seen a lot of things in my life," Tom said quietly. "I've been in combat situations where good people had to make terrible choices just to survive. But I've never understood people who hurt innocent creatures just because they're having a bad day. That tells me something important about your character, and I don't like what it tells me." The words hit Jake like physical blows because he knew Tom was absolutely right. There had been no excuse for his actions, and his pathetic attempts to justify them only made him look worse. He was being forced to confront an ugly truth about himself that he had never wanted to face. He was capable of cruelty, and that scared him more than Tom's anger did. Buddy whimpered softly in Tom's arms, and the older man immediately turned his attention back to comforting his injured companion. But his cold gray eyes never left Jake's face, and the unspoken message was clear. This confrontation was far from over, and Jake was going to face the full consequences of his terrible decision. Tom adjusted his hold on Buddy to make sure the injured dog was as comfortable as possible, while he continued his stern lecture to Jake. The older man's voice remained calm and controlled, but every word carried the weight of absolute moral authority. He had seen enough of life to know right from wrong, and he was not going to let this incident pass without making sure Jake understood the gravity of what he had done. "This dog has been my companion for 6 years," Tom said as he gently stroked Buddy's fur. "He's gotten me through some of the darkest times in my life after I came back from overseas. When I was dealing with nightmares and depression and feeling like the world didn't make sense anymore, Buddy was there for me every single day without fail." Jake listened in growing shame as he began to understand that he hadn't just hurt any random animal. He had attacked something that was deeply loved and treasured by someone who had already suffered enough pain in his life. The dog represented hope and companionship and healing for a man who had sacrificed years of his life serving his country in dangerous places. "Buddy doesn't know about war or violence or cruelty," Tom continued with quiet intensity. "He's never had a mean thought in his entire life. He wakes up every morning excited about the new day and happy to see me. He greets every person he meets with the same enthusiasm and trust because he believes the world is full of good people who will be kind to him." The small crowd of witnesses had grown larger as more people stopped to see what was happening at the gas station. Jake could feel their disapproving stares burning into him from all directions. Some of them were shaking their heads in disgust, while others whispered among themselves about what kind of person would kick an innocent dog for no reason. "You shattered that trust in a few seconds," Tom said with sadness creeping into his voice alongside the anger. "From now on, Buddy is going to be afraid when strangers approach him. He's going to remember that humans can hurt him without warning or reason. You didn't just cause him physical pain. You damaged something beautiful and innocent about his spirit." Jake felt tears starting to form in his eyes as the full impact of Tom's words hit him. He had never thought about the long-term consequences of his moment of cruelty. He had been so focused on his own problems and frustrations that he hadn't considered how his actions would affect an innocent creature that had done nothing wrong except try to be friendly. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan," Tom continued. "I've seen what happens when people lose their humanity and start treating others like they don't matter. It starts small with little acts of cruelty and disrespect. Before you know it, you're capable of terrible things you never thought you could do. That's a road you don't want to go down, son." The gas station owner approached the group and offered to call the police or animal control, but Tom waved him away. This was not a matter for the authorities. This was about one human being teaching another human being an important lesson about decency and compassion. Some lessons could only be learned through direct confrontation with the consequences of your actions. "My dog has never asked for anything from anyone except a little kindness, and maybe a pat on the head," Tom said as Buddy's tail gave a weak wag at the sound of his owner's voice. "He gives his love freely to everyone he meets without expecting anything in return. That's something most humans never learn how to do properly." Jake realized that he was witnessing something he had never seen before. He was seeing what it looked like when someone truly loved and cared for another living being. Tom's relationship with Buddy was based on mutual respect and genuine affection. It was the kind of bond that Jake had never experienced with anyone in his own life. "You had a choice when you saw my dog approaching you," Tom said with finality. "You could have chosen kindness or at least indifference. Instead, you chose cruelty. That choice reveals something important about who you are as a person. The question now is whether you're going to learn from this moment or whether you're going to keep making the same kinds of choices throughout your life." Jake knew that Tom was right about everything he had said. This moment was going to define him one way or another. He could either learn from his mistake and become a better person, or he could continue down the path of selfishness and cruelty that had led him to this shameful confrontation. The weight of Tom's words and the disapproving stares of the growing crowd finally broke through Jake's defensive barriers. All his excuses and justifications crumbled away as he was forced to confront the ugly truth about what he had done. The shame and guilt that had been building inside him since the moment he kicked Buddy finally became too much to bear. Jake looked down at the small brown dog in Tom's arms and felt his heart break a little bit. Buddy's trusting brown eyes were still filled with confusion and fear from the unprovoked attack. The little animal had no way of understanding why a stranger had hurt him so cruelly. All he knew was that someone had kicked him hard enough to cause pain and terror. "I'm sorry," Jake said quietly at first, then louder so everyone could hear him clearly. "I'm really truly sorry for what I did to your dog. There's no excuse for it. I was angry about stupid things that had nothing to do with him, and I took it out on an innocent animal who was just being friendly. That was wrong and cruel, and I feel terrible about it." Tom studied Jake's face, carefully looking for signs that the apology was genuine, rather than just words spoken to avoid further consequences. The older man had dealt with enough people in his life to know the difference between real remorse and fake regret. He could see tears forming in Jake's eyes and genuine shame in his expression. "I don't know what's wrong with me," Jake continued as his voice started to shake with emotion. "I've been so angry and frustrated lately that I guess I just snapped. But that doesn't make it right. Your dog didn't deserve what I did to him. He was just being a dog and trying to be friendly, and I hurt him for no good reason." Several people in the crowd nodded their approval as they heard Jake's sincere apology. They had been ready to condemn him completely, but his obvious remorse and shame were beginning to soften their anger slightly. At least he was admitting his mistake and taking responsibility for his actions instead of making more excuses. "I can see that you mean what you're saying," Tom said after a long pause. His voice had lost some of its cold edge, but it was still serious and stern. "But being sorry doesn't undo what happened. Buddy is still hurt and scared because of your actions. An apology is just the first step toward making things right." Jake nodded eagerly, wanting to do whatever he could to make amends for his terrible behavior. "What can I do to make it up to him? I'll pay for any vet bills if he needs medical attention. I'll do whatever you think is fair. I just want to make this right somehow." Tom looked down at Buddy, who was resting more peacefully in his arms, now that he was safe with his beloved owner. The dog's breathing had returned to normal, and his trembling had stopped. Physically, he would recover from his injuries within a few days, but the emotional damage might take much longer to heal. "Money isn't going to fix this," Tom said firmly. "What Buddy needs is to learn that not all humans are going to hurt him. He needs to rebuild his trust in people, and that's going to take time and patience. The question is whether you're willing to put in that effort, or if you're just looking for a quick way to make yourself feel better." Jake thought about Tom's words and realized that this was about much more than just apologizing for one moment of cruelty. This was about examining the kind of person he had become and deciding whether he wanted to change. His problems at work and with his girlfriend had turned him into someone angry and bitter who was capable of hurting innocent creatures. "I want to change," Jake said with conviction. "I don't want to be the kind of person who takes his anger out on defenseless animals. I don't want to be someone who causes pain just because I'm having a bad day. This whole thing has shown me something about myself that I don't like, and I want to be better." Tom continued to study Jake's face, looking for any signs of deception or manipulation. But all he saw was genuine remorse and a sincere desire to make amends. The older man had spent enough years dealing with people to recognize authentic emotion when he saw it. Jake's shame and regret were completely real. "Actions speak louder than words," Tom said finally. "If you really want to make this right, then you need to prove it through your behavior going forward. One apology doesn't erase what happened here today. You need to show that you've learned something from this experience, and that it won't happen again." Jake nodded solemnly, understanding that he was being given a chance to redeem himself. Tom could have called the police or made this situation much worse. Instead, he was offering Jake an opportunity to learn from his mistake and become a better person. It was more kindness than Jake deserved after what he had done. 3 months had passed since that terrible afternoon at Miller's Stop gas station, and Jake Thompson was a completely different person. The confrontation with Tom and the memory of Buddy's frightened eyes had haunted him every single day since then. He couldn't shake the image of the innocent dog looking up at him with confusion and terror after being kicked for no reason at all. Jake had spent many sleepless nights thinking about Tom's words and examining his own character. He realized that his problems at work and with his girlfriend had turned him into someone angry and bitter who was capable of cruelty toward innocent creatures. That revelation scared him more than any threat or punishment could have. He decided that he never wanted to be that person again. The first thing Jake did was volunteer at the Riverside Animal Shelter every Saturday morning. He started by cleaning kennels and washing food bowls, but gradually worked his way up to helping with dog walking and basic care. Being around rescued animals who had often been abused or abandoned taught him valuable lessons about patience and kindness. At first, many of the shelter dogs were afraid of Jake, just like Buddy had been afraid after the attack. They would cower in the back of their kennels or try to hide when he approached. But Jake learned to move slowly and speak softly, and offer treats until the frightened animals began to trust him. Earning their confidence became the most rewarding part of his week. Jake also started seeing a counselor to work on his anger management issues. He learned healthy ways to deal with stress and frustration that didn't involve taking his emotions out on innocent creatures. The therapist helped him understand that his cruel behavior toward Buddy had been a symptom of deeper problems with how he handled difficult situations in his life. His relationship with his girlfriend, Sarah, improved dramatically once he stopped being angry and defensive all the time. They were able to have honest conversations about their money problems and work together to find solutions instead of just arguing. Sarah noticed the positive changes in Jake's personality and began to trust him again with her own feelings and concerns. Even Jake's performance at work got better as he learned to manage stress more effectively. His boss stopped yelling at him about missed deadlines because Jake was no longer making careless mistakes due to anger and frustration. He approached his job with a calmer, more focused attitude that led to better results and recognition from his supervisors. But the most important change in Jake's life was his new relationship with animals. He couldn't pass a dog on the street without stopping to pet it gently and speak to it kindly. He carried treats in his jacket pocket for any friendly dogs he might encounter during his daily activities. Every positive interaction helped to balance out the memory of his cruelty toward Buddy. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Jake was walking dogs at the animal shelter when he saw a familiar blue pickup truck pull into the parking lot. His heart started beating faster as he recognized Tom Rodriguez getting out of the driver's seat. The older man looked exactly the same as he had 3 months earlier at the gas station, except perhaps a little more relaxed and peaceful. Tom walked toward the shelter entrance and stopped when he saw Jake holding the leash of a large German Shepherd mix that had been rescued from an abusive situation. The dog was still learning to trust people again, but had made remarkable progress under Jake's patient care over the past few weeks. "Hello, Jake," Tom said quietly as he approached. His voice held none of the cold anger that Jake remembered so vividly from their first meeting. Instead, there was something that might have been approval or even respect in his tone. "I heard from some people around town that you've been volunteering here." "That's good to hear." Jake felt a mixture of nervousness and hope as he faced the man who had taught him such an important lesson about kindness and responsibility. "I've been coming here every Saturday for the past 3 months," Jake said. "Working with these animals has taught me a lot about patience and treating living creatures with respect." Tom nodded slowly as he watched Jake interact gently with the large dog that was now wagging its tail and seeking attention. "Buddy is doing well," Tom said. "It took him a few weeks, but he's back to his old friendly self with people. Dogs are remarkably forgiving creatures. They don't hold grudges the way humans do." The two men talked for a few more minutes about Jake's volunteer work and his commitment to making positive changes in his life. When Tom finally left to conduct his business at the shelter, Jake felt a sense of closure that he had been seeking for months. The older man's approval meant more to him than any award or recognition he could have received. Jake continued his volunteer work at the animal shelter and eventually became one of their most trusted and reliable helpers. The shelter director offered him a part-time paid position working with dogs that had behavioral issues due to past trauma. Jake's patience and gentle approach made him particularly effective at helping frightened animals learn to trust humans again. Years later, Jake would look back on that terrible afternoon at Miller's Stop gas station as the most important day of his life. Not because of the cruel thing he had done, but because of the lesson he had learned from Tom Rodriguez about the kind of person he wanted to be. The memory of Buddy's frightened eyes had saved him from becoming someone he would have hated. Jake never saw Tom and Buddy again after that day at the animal shelter, but he thought about them often. Whenever he felt angry or frustrated, he would remember Tom's cold voice saying "big mistake" and choose to handle his emotions differently. He had learned that true strength came from protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, not from bullying them. The encounter at the gas station had taught Jake that every choice we make reveals something important about our character. He could have chosen to ignore the lesson and continue being angry and cruel. Instead, he chose to learn and grow and become the kind of person who made the world a little bit better for innocent creatures who depended on human kindness to survive. Jake's transformation was complete, but his commitment to being a better person would last for the rest of his life. He had learned that redemption was possible even after making terrible mistakes, but only if you were willing to do the hard work of examining yourself honestly and making real changes. The scared brown dog at a gas station had taught him the most valuable lesson he would ever learn about what it truly meant to be human.